Welcome to the 8th episode of the Dire podcast, recorded on May 3rd, 2020. I'm Sean Pfeil, and currently I am suffering from extreme back pain, so forgive me if you hear any wincing throughout this episode. Today we're going to talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I finished the game probably a week or so ago at this point. I've been playing through it on hard mode. We're going to go over my thoughts, what I liked, what I didn't like. Be forewarned, there are major spoilers. I will be discussing a lot of the things in it that you don't want to know if you haven't played the game yet, and that goes for fans of the original and for people who just haven't played anything Final Fantasy VII, period, so please be aware of that. In the middle of the podcast, we're going to take a break to meditate, center our thoughts, and de-stress, and at the end, we're going to add 5 games to the list: Golf, Prince of Persia, Odell Down Under, Minesweeper, and this episode's featured game, DuckTales. For those of you watching on YouTube, you're watching me play Phantasy Star Online, one of the greatest games ever made. For those of you listening on Apple, Google, or Spotify podcasts, you can head over to diredocs.com to find the video version of this podcast if you want to watch the Let's Play. Before we jump into my thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I do want to frame my opinion. Final Fantasy VII was not my first Final Fantasy. In fact, the original Final Fantasy was my first. But Final Fantasy VII did bring me back to video games after a hiatus. My parents had gotten rid of our gaming consoles for a few years, so the year Final Fantasy VII came out was the year that gaming re-entered our home, and although there were a couple games that came just before it, Final Fantasy VII was really what got me back into gaming. I briefly dabbled in Crisis Core. I actually just watched a movie of the entire Crisis Core game a couple days ago. But I didn't really play the game. I have seen Advent Children a bunch of times. And based on So that's my experience with the Final Fantasy VII compendium. I guess I did dabble in Dirge of Cerberus a bit too, but that doesn't matter. Based on footage from Final Fantasy VII Remake from E3 2019 and forward, I was extremely hesitant about the changes that they were making to the narrative, to the point where I almost waited on the game. There came a point where I just stopped watching the media for it. Seeing the quote-unquote Dementors flying around in an early scene with Cloud and Aerith in one of the trailers, I'm like, oh boy. And seeing Sephiroth appear in places, I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to like this remake or not. So I almost didn't get it, but I did play the demo, and I loved it. A lot of the things that they expanded on in the demo, you can hear my impressions in one of the previous podcasts. But some of the personalities, like with Jesse, was one of the highlights of that demo, stood out, and I'm like, okay, fine, I'll get it. But I waited, and with COVID-19 and all that sort of thing happening, I knew there wasn't going to be time to get a physical edition, so I ended up ordering digital day one, and got through it in about 40 hours, just shy of 40 hours. So it was a lot longer than I anticipated. So yeah, I'm going to jump into my thoughts here. I'm not sure how I'm going to carve this up, if I'm even going to carve it up. Maybe there'll be timestamps, maybe there won't. We'll see. I think I'm going to start with the gameplay, which is one of the highlights of this game. There were many highlights. I think starting out, the game, it plays from a level traversal perspective a lot like Final Fantasy XIII, which I did not have as many fond memories of, though I did beat that game. It's very linear. It does encourage some exploration. I mean, there are a couple hidden chests here and there, some hidden materia, or some things you gotta do to get to certain items that look just out of reach. So there it is a little bit, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. There's still some exploration there. It's just not super, engrossing. But, as I'm playing it and I'm in my mind thinking, man, it's Final Fantasy 13 all over again. It was clearly different. Like, the formula of this game worked so much better than 13 did. And I think part of that was also because of the narrative, right? So this game's broken up into chapters, and, similar to Final Fantasy 15, technically I think 13 might have been broken up into chapters. I honestly don't remember. But the narrative in 7 almost required a more linear flow, whereas in 13, man, I don't even remember the narrative for half that game. Anyway, this isn't about Final Fantasy 13. I think the exploration just on its own was all right. When you combine it with things like side quests, then it got a little bit more exciting. Because there's entire areas where if you're just sticking to the main quest, you don't even really need to go out there. And even some areas that you've been, when you revisit as part of a side quest, there's new monsters and enemies to fight. So from that perspective, it was fun. The side quests themselves were okay. I mean, a lot of them were just go kill this monster, or hey, can you go collect some things from people or out in the world. So nothing groundbreaking there, but for me, it was a fun diversion, and it was just an excuse to get back into the combat. So that is the biggest, one of the biggest positives about this game is the combat. The combat is incredibly engrossing, almost to the point where as soon as I finished the game, I jumped right back in. I'm playing it on hard mode now, and so again, spoilers. If you're still listening and you don't want to be spoiled about this game at all because you haven't beaten it yet, get out, because I'm going to talk about everything from the beginning to the end. But talking about hard mode, I just beat the Hell House on hard mode, and oh my gosh, that fight was ridiculous. So let me dig into the combat a little bit, and then I'll come back to the Hell House. So this game uses active time battle, and I really like how they implemented it. So you don't have to wait to do an attack like in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which I did not like. There's no auto attack. Like you can just swing your sword as much as you want, and there's animation phases and stuff, but you can make it a pure action game from that perspective. You don't have to wait to do an attack. However, there are certain abilities that you have, and in order to use those abilities, you have to expend parts of your active time battle. Gosh, I don't know what they're called. Your meter, I guess. So you have 2 bars, and some attacks only require 1 bar, some attacks require 2 bars. There's actually a limit you can get that will give you additional bars, but they lock certain abilities behind that bar, and the bar fills up over time a little bit naturally, not a whole lot, but it continually grows. As you get hit and as you dish out damage, it grows. And there's certain materials that make it grow in a variety of different ways. But so by having that in there, that's what gates you from just spamming all these abilities. So comparing that to the original Final Fantasy VII, where all of your attacks are executed based on the active time battle system, I really like that juxtaposition of the two, because it combines the real-time action with wait and take your turn. So I really liked that, and it added a very deep level of strategy to a lot of these fights. So speaking of the character abilities themselves, so the abilities themselves, you unlock them through weapons. They're called weapon skills. Some of them are materia based, but a lot of them you have to unlock by maxing out your weapon. As long as you have a certain weapon equipped, you can use that ability, but if you switch to another weapon, you can't use that ability unless you have become proficient in it. And that reminded me a lot of the system from Final Fantasy IX, where all of your armors and weapons have these passive abilities, or maybe actual abilities, that you get by equipping them, and over time through battles you gain ability points or something like that. I forget what it was called. I think it was AP. And once you have enough, it unlocks those abilities, and then you can change your gear, and you'll still keep the ability that you had on the gear. So it's very similar to that. And I loved that system from Final Fantasy IX. So seeing it here in Final Fantasy VII, even though it was just with weapons, like the armors don't give you any extra special abilities. They can give you some special boosts, but there's no real abilities linked to them. I want to see them expand that system a little bit going forward, because I love that kind of stuff. So I was happy to see it here, even though it was in a smaller form relative to Final Fantasy IX. So yeah, and these abilities do a bunch of different things, right? So there's some basic ones at the beginning that you're going to use more often, like Braver, where you do I think like a frontal slash, a vertical slash at your enemies. One of the ones that I used almost throughout the entire game was Triple Strike with Cloud. And it's an ability where as soon as you launch it, he will home in on an enemy, swipe, home in on another enemy, swipe, and then home in on another enemy and swipe. And it's dealing pretty decent damage when it does so. It's a great move to use when fighting bosses and stuff like that, where maybe they haven't been staggered yet and you're just trying to build up some damage, and you just go for that. I'll talk about staggering in a second. But there's also, well, I guess I can talk about staggering. So staggering is similar to Final Fantasy 13, and maybe this was in 15. I honestly don't remember. I think it was. But staggering basically means you fill up this other bar, and the enemy becomes totally defenseless for a brief period of time. And there's certain abilities that cause the stagger bar to fill faster. It's called pressure. So when they're under pressure, their stagger bar will fill quicker. And then once they've been staggered, there's other abilities that increase the stagger percentage, meaning you can dish out even more damage. Specifically, Tifa can get you you can get above 300% using her abilities, which is nuts. And then Aerith does have a Ray of Judgment attack that will raise the stagger percentage. I can't remember if Barret does. I'm not sure if Cloud does. I honestly don't remember. But so there's a lot of different abilities that do different things, right? It's not just about attacking. It's also about building these different meters to dish out even more damage. Aerith has abilities that, some really cool ones. Like there's, I forget what it's called, but there's an ability where she will pull out this passive, it's not like a fairy, it almost looks like a butterfly. I forget what they call it, like an aspect or something. Or a familiar, maybe? I can't remember. Anyway, she brings this fairy out, and every time she's attacking or using spells, it's also throwing out an attack or a spell. So it's like having a little mini bot with you that's also attacking, which I thought was really cool. And then the characters, in addition to the abilities, they've got their own special moves. So Cloud can go from an operator stance to a I forget what the other stance is called. One that's more heavy hitting but slower moving. Barret's got this super awesome overcharge attack, which destroys things in one hit, especially turrets, which is great. I'm not gonna explain all these different abilities. This isn't meant to be a review so much as it is impressions. Anyway, so there's a lot of different ingredients in the combat, right? And I haven't even talked about the materia, all the different magics you can use, and some of the different abilities that you can use. they're all mixed together in combat that is very satisfying. And when you're fighting regular enemies, especially early on, they can be somewhat of a challenge. Then there's like mid bosses, if you will. Like there's named enemies like the Huntsman in Chapter 2 that are stronger than the rest and take a little bit of extra effort to bring them down. And then you have the boss fights. The boss fights in this game are nuts. They're not all hard, especially on the normal setting. I really hope that in the future installments they can provide us a hard mode out the gate. Not to say normal was easy, but I didn't die as many times as I would have liked. Anyway, back to the bosses. On the normal difficulty, they're not all terribly hard. I think the Hell House was the first one that I almost died on. I actually got through it on my first try. On hard mode, Hell House is something completely different. But there were multiple bosses that over the course of the game, I'm thinking, man, this feels like a Dark Souls boss. For example, fighting Reno in the church. That felt like something out of Dark Souls. It wasn't as hard as a boss from Dark Souls, but the mechanics of the fight reminded me of a Dark Souls boss. And that was the first time that a Dark Souls-like thought came into my head while playing this game. But throughout the rest of the boss fights, not all of them, but a lot of them felt similar. Rude was very much like that. Rufus was very much like that. I get those are the human fights. But even things like the Hell House were incredibly challenging and required a lot of strategy. In addition to it, basically these boss fights really make you look through your catalog of abilities and spells and use them. You can't just slash your way through this game. You have to be smart about it, especially on hard mode. And honestly, outside of the narrative and some of the flashy points there, the boss fights for me were those were the things that I was playing the game for, right? Continually like, okay, I know the story that's coming up in this chapter. I'm going to enjoy it, but man, I can't wait to fight the boss that's coming up. The bosses were great. They were so well designed. I'm looking forward to playing them more. And actually, there's a boss, maybe multiple. Actually, I think there are multiple bosses that you can't play unless you're on hard mode, which I'm looking forward to. Can't wait to get there. Let me see here. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about the gameplay. I loved it. Some of the like I said early on, some of the exploration was a bit basic, I guess. I mean, it wasn't overly complicated, but for a game that was a bit more linear in its narrative storytelling, I was willing to forgive that. Knowing that in future games, future installments, things are going to have to open up unless they keep things linear going from area to area on the world map. But I'm really hoping that they give us some is it Pulse is the area in Final Fantasy 13 where things really opened up, or in Final Fantasy 15, like pretty much the entire game is all open. Like, I hope that they do that in future installments, because then you're really going to have that sense of exploration, which you couldn't really have in Midgar. They did their best. There were a few areas that were a little bit more open, like what's it called? Junk Boulevard, or I forget what it was called. One of the first places you do fights for fun or for side quests or whatever. Oh gosh, what was it called? It's not Junk Boulevard, it's something else. Anyway, they did their best with what they could. I really enjoyed it. Let me talk about the art style here. First of all, this game, it's beautiful. It's amazing. It's got some technical problems, especially on a base PS4. I'd be curious to see if it has these problems on the PS4 Pro, but there were some texture load problems. Some things looked a little basic until they loaded in. Some things just look basic all around. Like when you are, I think it's chapter 5, maybe 6, when you are turning off the lights, the big sun lamps, and you look down at the slums below, like that texture map that looked pretty bad. But it stretched out. Like, I'm okay with it. It's like, okay, that's not the focus. I'm not really supposed to be looking down there. But there were a few moments like that where it's like, that looks okay. But they, I'm so willing to look past that because the rest of the game was just so gorgeous. And it wasn't just the level design. It wasn't just the level of detail and the lighting. It was the character animations were so good in and out of combat. Like little subtle things, like how they got when characters are talking to each other, like in these more cinematic moments, like the way their eyes are constantly moving and looking back and forth like real eyes was so good. It like added to the immersion of the game so much. And it really brought these characters to life. Like I'm sure there was a lot of mocap involved, but man, the technology has come quite a long way, and it felt real. It was great, especially for some of the more emotional, impactful moments. There were some character models I thought that didn't look good at all. There was a lot of, when you're not in a cinematic moment, and I'm not talking about like the super high-end rendered stuff. I'm talking about there's character models for the story cinematics, like in-game story cinematics, but then there's just regular character models, if that makes sense, that are lower quality. And when they used those, it was like, especially when they're zoomed in. Like when you're not zoomed in on a face, it didn't look so bad, but a lot of the NPCs weren't so good. It was when you were having a more cinematic look at characters through some of the dialogue that they looked great and fantastic, but just running around the world sometimes they didn't look so good. Let's see. The enemy designs, gosh, they look great. It's funny, right? Like you go play the original Final Fantasy VII and you look at a lot of these monster types and it's like, how are they going to convert that into something that looks realistic like what we got in the remake? And I mean, they did it. They made it work. A lot of the sillier ones, like the Hell House, they made into bosses. There's that I forget what it's called, but that blue and red centipede thing, millipede, whatever, that thin robotic thing that you find a lot of in the original game in Shinra headquarters. They made that into a boss, which I thought was pretty cool. I like how they made some basic enemies into bosses. I like how some of the basic enemies literally look like their counterparts from the original game, down to things like the shock troopers, how they are like a little hunched over, and the way their animations and movements went, I was like, that is straight out of the game. It looks so good. They did a great job on the visuals. In the audio department, I felt like there were some missed opportunities here. I mean, like the menu sound effects could have been the original menu sound effects, but overall, I mean, I don't have anything to complain about. It was a tour de force of sounds and music. The vocal work was top notch. Holy hell! The main cast I thought was fantastic. Barrett, I loved Barrett. I thought it was great. I didn't know how they were gonna handle him, and I think they were true to his character without making it stereotypical. It's, I've actually seen a lot of discussion about this online, and for someone who has no no understanding of what Barrett has been through, you could say there's some stereotypes there, and I get it. Looking at it through the lens of, his history and the kind of person he is, and you see how he evolves over the course of this game, which really isn't so much an evolution as it is just us understanding who he really is. The actor for Barrett just absolutely nailed it. And in fact, Barrett's he's when I think back on the game, like, I think a lot of the quotes that I'm gonna reference from this game going forward, a lot of them are gonna come from Barrett. He was just so good. He was so good in this game. There were some not so great vocals or voice work, and some of the side characters, specifically like third party. A lot of the NPCs that aren't crucial to the main storyline, like the side quest stuff, weren't as good, but not all of them. A lot of them were good too. I really liked how the music was layered, to where, like, you're about to go into a boss fight or some sort of fight because the music's tense, but it's not like super full blown yet. But then as soon as you go into the fight, it ramps up, and you get the full instrumentation. I like how they did that. Some of the tracks, there were some tracks that blew the originals away, which I don't even believe I'm saying that, but there were some really, really great interpretations of a lot of the music from the original game. Some of them I thought were a miss. They weren't bad. They just didn't live up to the expectations I had based on some of the originals. But that's okay. I mean, you can't... Making all of them better than the original was going to be an impossible task anyway. I really like how there's these remixed versions that you can collect along the way for the jukebox, and some of them were really good. I really like those interpretations as well. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about what I think everybody probably wants to hear me discuss, if you're even listening to this, is the narrative. I'm going to save the analysis for other videos, whether they're mine or somebody else's. I don't know if I'll get super in-depth discussing the plot points here, but I will say I freaking loved this game. I loved the story. I went in thinking I'd hate the changes. Like I said, looking at some of those trailers and seeing some of the obvious things they were changing without explanation, I'm like, why did they need to do that? That is so stupid. That's dumb. Even before the big reveal of the big twist, long before the big twist, I was bought in. I was still a little like, why are there Dementors here? Okay, I guess I'll roll with it. Maybe they're spirits of Genova, and that's going to pay off in some shape or form. Because I was okay with some of that side questy stuff, like going up to the plate with Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge. That whole section I thought was awesome. That was great, and that was not in the original game, and I was on board. I was interested. It was character development for those characters. It was development for those characters, and the whole time I'm like, man, that's gonna have such... Now the payoff when the plate collapses, it's gonna feel that more emotional, and it did. But then they kept Biggs alive, they kept Wedge alive, and it's like, whoa. And then you find out at the end of the game, Biggs is alive, which makes me think that Jessie is alive out there somewhere. I think she was the one who probably rescued Biggs. I think I'll get to her in a little bit. We'll discuss that later. But I really liked those changes. I didn't think I would, but I did, and it was because, I gotta say, the moment when I knew something was going on, and this is probably the moment most people thought something was going on, was when Cloud fell into the church, and Aerith was telling him about her special materia, and he looks at the bow in her hair, and I can't remember if she was pointing to it, like, here's where I keep my materia, or if he just instinctively knew to look there. And then he had a flash forward to her death scene, and I'm like, that doesn't happen in the game, like in the original. Like, nowhere does anybody have some sort of premonition of the future. And so I knew something was off at that point. And I have a few theories, or I had a few theories that I'd posted, and they were actually pretty close to right. I just picked the wrong person. My theory was that Cloud was that at the end of the original game, Cloud gets thrown into the life stream, and now he's reliving the events of the game, but being in the live stream, things are in his mind all screwed up, and things are happening, and this would eventually lead to him coming back out of the live stream, and then we'd continue on from there and have an actual Final Fantasy VII 2. But come to find out, it wasn't Cloud, it was Sephiroth and I guess Aerith, who both have understanding of what happened in the original game, and now, as you know, Sephiroth was trying to change the future, trying to change his fate so that he didn't lose. And so that's the big twist, right? That this was a sequel. And it was like, holy hell, that's amazing! Like, if you had known that going in, I would have been like, but the way that they roll it out to you, and the way it made me question what was going on without fully putting it in your face. Like, I still didn't get it until basically when they're there on the road, on the highway at the end. Like, it didn't click. I'm like, I still don't understand. How are they seeing Meteor practically destroying Midgar? And they're all like, what was that? Like, because then I knew it wasn't just Cloud, right? I was like, how did Barrett and Tifa saw it too? So something else is going on. I guess you could have figured it out a little bit sooner. There's a piece, or there's a scene in Chapter 3 when Cloud gets off the train and they're going to 7th Heaven, and on the way there's this guy pulling posters off the wall, and he starts talking to Cloud, and Cloud looks up at the pillar and sees an explosion. And I should have known at that point, but I don't know why I didn't think of it then. That was the first instance. But anyway, there were a lot of changes, right, as a result of Sephiroth trying to change history. They weren't apparent at first, but over the course of the game, things changed more and more and more, to the point where that last like 3 or 4 chapters, while it followed the same story beats, a lot of it was different. Like the way in which you meet Red 13 was totally different, which, by the way, he knows what's going on because Aerith touched him and he had this look on his face like, oh, now I get it. Like something was shared with him that hasn't been shared with the other characters yet. Also, it was shared with Marlene, whatever it was. But like they don't get captured and put in cells, and then Genova breaks loose and kills a bunch of people. Like it didn't work that way. Instead, they get thrown into the drum, and they have to fight their way out of there, which I liked. I thought that was fun. Oh gosh, what was I gonna say? There was a big change in there. Oh, duh. Like Barrett getting stabbed, like his quote-unquote death scene. I was like, as it was happening, I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, I get it. He just got stabbed through the gut by frickin' Sephiroth, like, or Genova, or one of the clones or whatever. And I'm like, no. I'm like, they wouldn't do that. I'm like, there would be riots in the streets if they just killed off Barrett for the rest of this remake. I'm like, that's not gonna happen. And sure enough, it didn't happen. Obviously, like they had one of the whispers inside of him to take the blow, and so he was fine. But like that was almost like an Infinity War level snap, right? It's like, okay, he's coming back. Like that's fine. Like I wasn't phased, but at the same time, I'm like, wow, that was ballsy to have them do that move. Like that is a significant difference. And it was like how, like things really spun out of control after that point. Until the end, and you see everything that's going on. I have to go back and revisit a lot of that ending to really truly understand it, but at the end of the day, I loved it. The honeymoon period is far from over, let me tell you. I still love it. You know, let's see. I don't know what else I want to talk about here. I thought all the characters were great. They were what I expected. I like some little tweaks that they did compared to, so for example, like Reno in Advent Children, while he's still technically a bad guy, they make him out to be like comic relief, him and Rude. In this game, Reno is straight up like an evil dick. Like, oh my god. Like, he wasn't throwing out like super corny puns the whole time. Like, he's legitimately like not great. Which I loved. I mean, that's the Turks, right? I think they will become more and more friendly. Well, actually, I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? They stay enemies throughout the whole game in the original Final Fantasy. It wasn't until Advent 7. It wasn't until Advent Children that they become like, you know, the bad guys that are now partners or whatever. I like Hojo. I like what they did with him. He reminded me of Pritchard from Deus Ex. I don't know why, but I really like how they envisioned his character. Yeah, I think just the last thing I'll talk about there is regarding Sephiroth. I've seen a lot of complaints of people who saying they didn't talk about him the whole game. Like, if you went into this brand new, you'd never played the original Final Fantasy VII, you're gonna be like, who is this Sephiroth guy and why should I care? Like, what's the history there? They don't explain any of that, and then they throw him at you as the final boss fight, and it's like, you know, a lot of people who hadn't played the first game are probably like, am I missing something here? Like, was I just supposed to have known? And yes, you were supposed to just have known, because this was not a remake. It was a sequel. And even following the story beats of the original game, they don't even talk about Sephiroth until after Midgar. Like, yes, you see impacts from him, specifically Genova escaping and killing off President Shinra, but it's not until Calm that Cloud goes through the entire story of Sephiroth and Nibelheim to give context. And I think if they had stopped and done that here, it would have broken up the flow of the narrative and potentially ruined some things later, right? Because, you know, as spoilers, you shouldn't be listening, but as everybody knows from the original game, the memories Cloud has of that event are wrong because of the experiments that were done on him that he's not remembering. And it's possible Tifa could have, you know, said something about it right up front if they had had that conversation in Midgar. But because they have it in Calm, after all that stuff happens in Midgar, I can't remember her reasons, but she stays silent and she lets it play out. And so, you know, I think while I can see people being frustrated that they don't know what Sephiroth means to the story if they hadn't played it, I think it was the right call by the developers to not go into his story. Because, again, this... And it... oh god, what's his name? Jim... Sorry, I can't think of Jim's last name. Jim from the Jimquisition. I don't know why I'm having a brain fart. But he made a good point in one of his videos when he was talking about this topic, and now my train of thought has completely left me, in regards to should they or shouldn't they have said anything. Oh, and it's because, you know, people went into this thinking this was a remake, and while it is, the double entendre there is that Sephiroth is remaking the timeline so that he will succeed. Therefore, this is not a remake so much as it is a sequel. And because it's a sequel, you need to know everything that happened in the original game to get the context of everything that's happening in this game. Even though they're repeating a lot of it, you're gonna miss stuff. And so I think they did that right. I think that was the right call. And I loved it. Um, mm, 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 mm. So I think that's it. I think that's all I'm going to talk about the game itself. Again, I loved it. I'm not going to give it a review score or anything like that. I will put it on the list towards the end of the year. I'll do a special with all the games that I've played this year and add them all to the list. So I'm not going to add it right now, but this game scored a lot higher than I thought it was going to. Suspense until the end of the year to see where it landed, but it landed pretty high. Before we move on, I do want to throw out a couple theories and guesses as to what we might see in the future. So there's a couple scenes in this game, there might be more, where there's a soldier that recognizes Cloud, and they don't call him out by name, but there's a scene in Chapter 2, like it's very blink and you miss, when Cloud's about to jump on the train to escape, where there's a soldier that goes, hey, wait a minute, like he looks at Cloud like he knows who he is, and they breeze through it super fast, and then Cloud's on his way. And then towards the end, right outside the simulator in Shinra Tower, there's a guy that recognizes Cloud and was like, oh, hey, man, I haven't seen you in forever. Let me go get Kunzel or whatever his name is, who, when I was watching the video of Crisis Core, was a guy in Crisis Core. So I'm like, oh, wow, that was a cool little reference. I think we are likely going to see that soldier appear again in future installments. I think they're gonna use that. I could see it happening in Junon when Cloud has to dress up in a soldier uniform and go through the parade. I bet at that moment we're going to see that soldier who recognized Cloud reappear again. Him or Kunzel or both. That's happening. I'm calling that one right now. Second, they played up a war with Wutai a lot in this game. They planted that seed. I am convinced we are going to see some sort of Midgar versus Wutai plot line as we go forward, because they didn't just stick to it's Avalanche. They said, oh, they're being funded by Wutai or whatever it was they were saying, and everybody's like, oh no, are we going back to war with Wutai? And damn Wutai, we got to go after them. Like, it was out there quite a lot if you paid attention, and I don't think it was just there to add some lip service to this game and then they just dropped the ball. So instead of Wutai being like a side bonus area in a future installment, I think there's going to be some legitimate narrative around Wutai and maybe even Wutai versus Midgar in other locations throughout the world as we progress the story. And I'm be curious to see how that impacts Yuffie and her inclusion as a character in the party. Right? Maybe instead of her coming to the team trying to steal their stuff, she recognizes them as Avalanche, and from all the scenes of what happened in Midgar, and because now Midgar's anti-Wutai again, she blames Avalanche, and maybe that's how she attacks them. So that's another one I'm going to call right there. Two more here. One is that Jessie's alive. I'm pretty sure she brought Biggs to safety. I'm not sure how, but I think she did. And I think we are going to see her again next at the Golden Saucer. They made a point of saying that she was an actress and that she got a role in a play at the Golden Saucer as the princess. And I think that that's when we're going to run into her again, and it's going to be this big surprise that that she will be at the Golden Saucer when the party arrives, and she will be doing her part in the play there. And I could also see, I don't know how far I'm going to go down with this theory, but I do think that all the flirting she did with Cloud will pay off at some point, from the perspective of she will play the princess and he will play the prince coming to save her, as opposed to whoever it is you go on the fireworks date with. And it would be really interesting to see how they approach it that way. So basically the fireworks date, not with Jesse, but that scene where Cloud and whoever go to the theater and Cloud and whoever get pulled up on stage. I think it's going to be Cloud and Jesse reenacting that piece. Curious to see how that's going to impact Tifa and Aerith, I guess, but more so Tifa. So I'm calling that one. And then lastly, this isn't really a prediction. I'm not sure what's going on with Zack, but they better be careful, because Cloud needs to have that inner turmoil for a while. I will be so upset if we get through this whole remake sequel and we don't get a scene of Tifa in the live stream with Cloud trying to help him piece his memories back together. Like, that is, you look at Aerith's death scene as a big scene in the game, but I'd argue that scene with Tifa and Cloud is one of, if not the best moments in the entire game. This channel was built to help me with anxiety, and that scene is all about helping somebody deal with mental issues, right? And I would be so upset if that scene does not appear. And if Zack shows up at any point before then, he knows what happened to Cloud, and he could easily help Cloud get over that stuff, I would think. And I really don't want that to happen. It's hard to know what they're doing with Zack. It's clear he's alive in some capacity, though we don't know if it's in quote-unquote our timeline, the new timeline, or if it's in some other one, meaning there's like this crazy multiverse thing going on. I think just the way they presented it was a little weird. I'm gonna say that scene with Zack wasn't happening concurrently with the scene on the highway. I think that was just a flashback, and we're gonna find out that Zack is still alive. He managed to bring Cloud down to Midgar, but then disappeared and went somewhere. And maybe because Sephiroth appeared before him or something. Maybe Sephiroth has Zack. Maybe Zack survived and then Sephiroth captured him and has him somewhere. I don't know. But they got to be careful with that. So that's it. I've talked a lot about this game. A lot of that stuff was just explaining what's in the game, so I hope you enjoyed it. But those are my thoughts on it. Now we're going to take a quick break. I want everybody to take a deep breath, relax, and meditate with some music from Ecco the Dolphin. that was the opening theme from Ecco the Dolphin on the Sega Genesis. Now we're moving on to the list. The list is a continually growing record of every game I have ever played. With today's 5 inductees, there are now 45 games on the list. I'm going to talk about each of the new games and then reveal their ranking. You can see the most up-to-date list on dirediredocs.com. We're going to start with Golf. Golf on the NES. I hated this game. And it could have just been at the time of my extreme youth. I didn't know how to play golf. But, man, this game was not my cup of tea. Mario Golf and Hot Shots Golf, fantastic games. We'll get to those at some point in the future. Absolutely love those games. But this golf game, not great. In fact, I was so turned off by this game. I'm going to give you the ranking right up front. It comes in 45th. Like, it's in last. It comes in just below Marble Madness. Like, hey, good for you, Marble Madness. You're not in last place anymore. Golf, no, did not like it. Looking at it as an adult, I can see how it was actually, for the NES days, a really good game. But when you compare it to games like Mario Golf or Hot Shots Golf, I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, how could I have played this back then? Like, it doesn't give you the tools you need to hit the ball in just the right way. I'm like, So yeah. Golf, you're in last place, and you will probably be there for quite a while. Game number 2, Prince of Persia. This was a game I don't think I owned on the NES, but I did at least rent it a few times. There was something magical about it. There was something I really enjoyed. Looking at the game with modern eyes, I will say the animations are really, really well done in Prince of Persia. Like, wow, that was really good. I couldn't get into the Metroidvania style gameplay, which it really wasn't Metroidvania. It was more just a giant maze with death traps. As a kid, I didn't like that so much, but I did like doing the jumps, and I did like grabbing the ledges. Like, there was something about that I liked. So I don't have too many fond memories of it, but I did have enough to put it in 24th out of 45th. Excuse me, out of 45. Just above Mario Bros. 24th place. Game number 3, I dare say, is a game most of you have not heard of. It's a game from the... Oh gosh, I guess I played it on a Macintosh computer? I don't know. Odell Down Under. Odell Down Under is a computer game about being a fish. And it basically puts you as a fish in this coral reef across a few different screens. And you have to swim around and eat stuff and survive. And there's a few different modes. Like, there's a mode where you just have to live. There's a mode where you've got to eat the right things or you die. And then there's a mode where I think you can just... It's just like free roam, or like you evolve your fish as you go or something. But it was always a lot of fun, like swimming around and trying to avoid the sharks, or being a shark and going around and just eating things. It's hard to explain if you haven't played it, especially without the visuals. Like, the visual style was like this cool hand-drawn animation. It looked really good. Anyway, Odell Down Under... It was a game that all the kids in elementary school would love to play. Like, whenever we had computer time, we'd all play Odell Down Under. It was so much fun. Comes in 16th place above Duck Hunt. I know, that's pretty crazy considering a lot of the classic games that are listed below it on the list, which you can check out at dirediredocs.com. But yeah, Odell Down Under was a game that I really, really thoroughly enjoyed. Game number 4 is Minesweeper from the PC, specifically Windows, the original Minesweeper. I mean, there's not a lot to say here. Like, Microsoft did good by putting certain games in in their pack, and Minesweeper was just one of those great puzzle games that, you know, like a Tetris, it's a puzzle game that just has this natural entertainment to it that I really enjoyed. Like, I would just sit there and play it for a couple hours on end. I think in today's world, like, it wouldn't be enough to keep me entertained, but back then on the computer, like, it was also a game that helped train you in how to even use a computer, right? I guess it depends on your age and when you got into using a computer, but that was one of the first things I did when I had a computer, was play Minesweeper, and, you know, it teaches you the difference between a left click and a right click, that's for sure, because both of those do very different things in Minesweeper. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. I didn't even explain what the game is, so if you haven't played it, oh well. I put it in 15th, just above Odell Down Under. Yeah, good old Minesweeper. Alright, featured game for this episode is DuckTales. I don't have an elaborate discussion planned for DuckTales, so this one might be a shorter featured game, but that's okay. DuckTales, I think, as a platformer, was pretty unique in that a lot of the traversal is you're on a cane. You're going to bounce on your cane to get through, and the physics of that was a lot of fun. I didn't like so much how you hit things with your cane, like there was a sluggishness to it. But the bouncing mechanic was so fluid, and I loved it. It felt great. DuckTales, you know, when you look back on it from this day and age, I think it's probably most well known for the moon theme, which it should be. That theme is fantastic. The overall soundtrack in the DuckTales game was great. The moon theme was a transcendent experience. Like, there is something about that theme that just everybody keyed off on, and it was just, oh man, it was so good. Like, it hits you in the feels. And if you haven't seen DuckTales 2017, the new re-envisioning of the cartoon, do yourself a favor, go watch it. Go get on Disney Plus if you don't have that. All the episodes are out of order, so you're going to have to look up a viewing order online so that you don't spoil anything. But go watch 2017 DuckTales. There's a few episodes where they work the moon theme into the show. The show does a lot of really good references, and this was one of them. It blew my mind when I heard it. It actually appears a couple times. And, yeah. Even today, in this day and age, they're still referencing this game that came out in the, I guess it would have been late 80s, early 90s. Probably late 80s. Anyway, the story of the game wasn't great. I mean, it was just like, oh, it's Uncle Scrooge going to get diamonds and stuff, and beating the Beagle Boys and Magica to Spell or whatever. I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot of narrative there, but for a kid, it didn't matter, right? That was all the DuckTales was about, you know? It was just going on adventures and getting money. And as a platformer back then, it was a lot of fun. I actually have... I don't know what it is about that music from DuckTales, and even just the main theme. Like, there was just something so triumphant about it. I don't know what it is that I'm trying to say, but I remember coming home from a road trip with my family, like a 2-week road trip, and as we were pulling back up to our house for the first time in 2 weeks, which for a kid felt like forever, I had DuckTales on the Game Boy, and which that's not the version that we're putting on the list. I'm putting the NES version on the list today. Maybe we'll talk about the Game Boy version some other time. But I remember blasting the DuckTales theme through my Game Boy as we're pulling back into the driveway, as sort of like a celebratory, we're home. Yeah. Anyway, let's see. Where did I put DuckTales? So if Minesweeper came in 15th, DuckTales gets into the top 14. It doesn't get too high. I put it in 13th place, just above Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. It's a great game. I forget what score I would have actually given it, but, it's a game that I will always have fond memories of, and if I ever play it, again, bouncing on canes is great. Coming up in our next podcast episode, our featured game is going to have a lot more to talk about than DuckTales. Our featured game is going to be Super Mario Bros. 3, finally finishing off the NES Mario trilogy by adding Super Mario Bros. 3 to the list, so be on the lookout for that. In the last podcast, I said I was thinking about adding Animal Crossing to the list in this episode, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to save Final Fantasy VII Remake and Animal Crossing and Doom Eternal and whatever else I play that came out this year for a special episode at the end of the year. So, not going to do that. As part of closing things out here, want to share a couple things. Number one, I started playing Phantasy Star Online again. I mean, if you couldn't tell, you're watching me play it online. Or you're watching the Let's Play of it. I've been playing it on I think it's pronounced Affinia, the Affinia server, which is basically a free server with a free copy of PSO. I mean, I have it on GameCube, so whatever. But I've never really played it online before, and it's a lot of fun. I think I've got my Ranger up to 41. I just got onto very hard mode, and it's great. I love it, and I love playing with other people. It makes it a new experience, and there's a lot of quests that I didn't get to play in the original too. There's actually a whole episode 4 that I never got to play, which I'm excited to go visit that at some point just to see what they do there. Let's see. I'm still playing Tactics Ogre. I finally saved the guy that kept rushing into battle blindly and dying. I found out that his character actually is blind, so I thought that was kind of funny. I haven't progressed past that level yet. Like, I finally saved him and finished the level, but then I stopped. I need to go back and do a RPG journal for DireDireDocs.com to catch everybody up to that point, because it's I still have a few levels prior to that I haven't discussed yet, so need to do that. And there will be more RPG journal entries to come for other games. I'm going to pick up Chrono Trigger, which I've already played, but I'm going to be picking up Chrono Trigger on Steam sale, because I haven't played it in a long time, and so I'm probably going to do a journal of that. Yeah, I think that about does it for this episode of the Dire Dire Podcast. Thank you for listening. Again, please check out DireDireDocs.com for podcast updates and updates on other content. This is Sean Pfeil, and this has been the Dire Dire Podcast. Thank you very much.